This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi Say. Parshas Shelach. Baruch Haba to the Kollel Igud Pirka. We have the well-known episode of the Meraglim who caused Klal Yisrael to cry. It says, Vayivka, Vayivku, Balayla Hahu. They cried on that night. Chazal tell us, because they cried B'chiyah Shel Chinam, they cried for nothing. Therefore, the Rebbe Shalom says, I will give you a cause to cry, B'chiyah L'doros, a crying for all generations. So, apparently, this was greatly disturbing to the Rebbe Shalom, the fact that Klal Yisrael cried over the report of Eretz Yisrael. And the Maral explains to us exactly what was so disturbing about that cry. Says Maral, by nature, everybody longs for his natural place. In other words, there's a deep-seated inclination in the heart of a person to return to his place of origin, his place of that he naturally is connected to. V'oy, it says Maral in the Netzach Yisrael Parshas, ki kol hadvarim hativim mishtoikekim el makayma mativi. All natural things long for their natural place. V'im haya haaretz li Yisrael makam tivi. If Eretz Yisrael was the natural land of Klal Yisrael, v'hayu mishtoikekim el aretz, and they longed for that land, hayanishar zanitzchi, that in fact would have been their eternal land. If Klal Yisrael would have longed for Eretz Yisrael, that would have shown that in fact Eretz Yisrael belongs to Klal Yisrael. Aval haya kana hepach. But here we had the exact opposite. That instead of Klal Yisrael longing for Eretz Yisrael, they cried about their bad fortune of having to go into Eretz Yisrael. Shabachu b'chiyah shel chinam. They cried for naught. V'lo ratzu lavay al aretz. They didn't want to come into the land. So what does that demonstrate? What does that show? That shows there's a deep-seated disconnect between the people and the land. Because naturally a person should long for his natural land. The fact that Klal Yisrael cried over it means Taka, the land, does not belong to them. They're not connected to the land. That's why Hashem said you can't be there. This shows, this is what the pasuk means. They cried for nothing. And they despised what Tehillim it says, Eretz Chemda. Eretz Yisrael is the desirable land. That's what we say in benching. Eretz Chemda Toiva Urachava. This caused an eternal crying. This caused them to be exiled from the land. The fact that they were able to cry means this is not their land. In other words, somebody, wherever a person grows up, they like that land. I grew up in Brooklyn. Now I know there are a lot of people, they don't like Brooklyn. I'm aware of that. But I like it. Why do I like it? Because I grew up there. And the Chazal say, it's a Gemara in Soita, Chein makom al yoshveh. Wherever you live, you like it. People live in this neighborhood. It took me 10 years to figure out what people like about this neighborhood. And now I like it also. But people like, the housing, there's a lot to say, but nevertheless, people who live here, they like it. Why? You like where you live. You like where you belong. The fact that Klal Yisrael was able to cry about having to go into Eretz Yisrael, that demonstrates they don't belong there. Hashem says, Yitaka don't belong there. It's not a punishment, it's the natural consequence. Because you know what Klal Yisrael's reaction should have been naturally? Naturally, they should have been thrilled to be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. The fact that they were able to cry, Hashem says, you're crying, sorry, you've just created a tremendous fundamental crack between you and Eretz Yisrael. You can't go there. You can't go there. Every item longs for the place that's natural to him. That shows that unfortunately Eretz Yisrael could not belong to the Jewish people at that point in history.
They cried because they couldn't conquer it, not because they wanted.
No, they were afraid. They were afraid. They were afraid of the Gunus. They heard the bad reports, and they were scared to have to deal with the deficiencies. Hashem told them they're going to conquer it. So what were they crying over? They were crying over the fact that this was going to be theirs. Rabbi Shem says, you're crying about it? Then taka doesn't belong to you. So I would like to devote today's shiur to which is really the central theme of the Parsha, and that is Klal Yisrael showed a certain unappreciation for Eretz Yisrael, and I would like to speak about the concept of love for Eretz Yisrael. Now I want to begin by speaking something out that's not on the sheet. This could be found in the Chidushim of Rabbi Nachum Zemba. Rabbi Nachum Zemba was the preeminent Lamdin and Gadol during the Second World War. My grandfather was very close with him. Grandfather was a ben bayis by Rabbi Nachum Zemba, along with a small chabura of people who used to learn in his house every day, along with Rabbi Nachum Zemba's nephews, Rabbi Meir Zemba, Rabbi Ramsha Zemba. My grandfather said he had a perush, I believe on the entire Rambam. Over his, he had a bookcase just of Kisvei Yad on the entire Rambam that unfortunately was lost. Nachum Zemba was the Goinei Hadar. So he writes in the name of the Arizal. Of course, Rabbi Nachum Zemba wrote, we only have a few things from Rabbi Nachum Zemba. He wrote on Hilchos Shabbos, Toitzois Chaim, which is the work on Hoitzah. He wrote a Sofer, he had a son who Nebuch died young, and he didn't have any progeny after that. He has a Sofer called Gur Ar Yehuda in the name of his son, in memory of his son Yehuda. Rabbi Nachum Zemba, in the Chidushei HaGarmaz, Chidushei Hagun Rabbi Nachum Zemba, he writes that in the name of the Arizal, that the mitzvah of Bikurim is a tikkun for the Chet HaMeraglim. How's that? So the Arizal says the Chet HaMeraglim was, they showed ill appreciation for Eretz Yisrael. They didn't show enough chivas haaretz, and the mitzvah of Bikurim is a mitzvah of chibas peros haaretz, and therefore the mitzvah of Bikurim is a tikkun for the Chet of the Meraglim. So says Hagoyin Rabbi Nachum Zemba, comes out beautifully if you look in the Mishnah on Bikurim. The Mishnah says Ketzad Bikurim Adam Yoreh L'Soich Sadeu V'Roya Rimoin Shabiker Te'ena Shabiker Gefen Shabiker. He puts a gemi around it. Ask Rabbi Nachum Zemba, why does the Tana of the Mishnah Dafka pick these three fruits? Rimoin, Te'ena, Gefen? Because these are the three fruits that the Meraglim tried to use to show that the land was not good. And therefore, to be masaking that, the Tana Dafka picks in the Mishnah and Bikurim these three fruits, Rimoin, Te'ena, Gefen. Azoy Zok to Menachem Zemba. Okay, so if you look at number 2, the Mishnah says, the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, Amar Reish Lakish, Kishahalachti L'Tchum Kan Nishraya. When I went to a certain city, Hayukairin Lakala Ninfi. They called a bride Ninfi. What's a Ninfi? Lakala Ninfi Mai Kra. Says the Gemara, Mai Kra. Ninfi is a lashon Yifei Noif Mesais Kol Haaretz. We know, some people they celebrate Yom Yerushalayim, not a day on the calendar, not a halachic day. But according to tradition, every Monday is the Yom Yerushalayim. Why? Because every Monday we say Shir Mizmar Levnei Kayach, Gadol Hashem is great, Umahula Moed, and very praiseworthy. Where? Be'ir Alekeinu, in the city of Hashem. What's the city of Hashem? Har Kodsha Yifei Noif. What does Yifei Noif mean? Fairest of all cities. Mesois Kol Haaretz, joy of the earth. That's what we say every Monday. That Yerushalayim is the fairest of cities, the joy of all the earth. So when Reish Lakish came to a certain location, they would call every Kala Ninfi a reference to Yerushalayim. But the point being that we have a certain relationship with Yerushalayim. It's not just a location. Our relationship with Yerushalayim is a relationship of a Chasam and a Kala. Yerushalayim is our Kala. That's why in this city, Kan Nishraya, they would call a Kala Yerushalayim. They would call her Ninfi, just to bring out the idea that there's a certain living relationship a Jew has to have with Yerushalayim. It's a certain hiskashros, a certain hiskarvos to Yerushalayim. In fact, in the times of the Gemara, if you got called up for maftir, you had a choice of laning any haftarah you wanted. You could lane any haftarah you wanted. You could lane this, you could lane from... It was at your discretion. So, there's a story, the Gemara says in Megillah Daf Chaf Hey Amud Beis, about somebody who got called up for maftir, and he selected as his choice for maftir, I believe from Yechezkel, Hoida es Yerushalayim es Tayavoisea. Let Yerushalayim know her abominable acts. In other words, a haftarah that talks about what was going on there, the bad things going on in Yerushalayim. Omar Loi, so Rabbi Lezer said, before you pick on Yerushalayim, pick on your own mother. Yeah, you know, like in city speak, you know, you're right? What?
Mother.
Yeah, exactly. So before you pick on Yerushalayim, well, let's see what your own mother. Let's see what's going on with Titzach with your mother. He says, go pick on your own mother. And in fact, they searched into the guy and they found he was a puzzle. They found something was happening with his. If he had the audacity to select as a haftarah the deficiencies of Yerushalayim, that showed there's something wrong with your kala, right? What's the pshat? It's pasuk and navi. We're not erasing it from the Nevi'im, but what we're learning is the following: someone who is engaged to get married, Kemat anyone who is engaged thinks that their prospective kala is perfect, right? And then afterwards, some people find out that maybe somebody once told me that. Yeah? But Kemat everybody when they're engaged, they think that their kala is perfect. Everybody thinks that. Why is that? And then the answer is, it says in Mishlei, V'al kol pishayim techasa ahava. Love conquers all, they say. You have a love for somebody, you don't see, you're blinded. You don't see. It's like you see, you look, but you don't see. And then, as it wanes and as it waxes, right, as it fades, so then all of a sudden the pshayim, the faults, person sees. The relationship a person should have with Yerushalayim is a relationship to a kala. That with all of whatever deficiencies maybe there are, you can't see it, you don't see it, you don't notice it. The love for the city, if we could say the romance for the city covers up any deficiency. And if a person is lacking in that ahava, so that shows there's something lacking in their neshama. And if that's why they see the tayavos, so then Rabbi Lezer says, before you see the tayavos Yerushalayim, check into your own lineage. In fact, there are many Gedolim who certainly longed and yearned for Yerushalayim, for Eretz Yisrael, but one that stands out in his really powerful, overwhelming Ava for Eretz Yisrael and for Yerushalayim is Chasam Sofer. Chasam Sofer, in his writing is Rotzuf Ava for Eretz Yisrael and for Yerushalayim. In all, whether it's the Shas Teshuvas Chasam Sofer, the Tairas Moshe, Chasam Sofer ala Torah, the various Svarim. In fact, Chasam Sofer points out in number 6, in his commentary to Pirkei Avos, we know every day in the Beis HaMikdash how many miracles happened in the Beis HaMikdash every day. 10. A woman did not miscarry from the smell of the barbecue, from the meat. The meat never spoiled. They never saw flies in the places of the butchers for the karbanos. The Kohen Gadol never became tamei leil Yom Kippurim. The rain never put out the fire on the Mizbeach. The wind never blew the straight column of smoke. The Omer never became pasal shtei alechem, lechem aponim. Says the Mishnah, oimdim tzefufim. When they stood in the Azara, they stood packed like sardines, and miraculously when they bowed down, there was room for everyone to bow down. Nobody ever got bit by a snake or scorpion. Nobody ever said to their friend, it's too cramped here in the hotel. Nobody ever said it was too cramped. What are you talking about? It's a stira minei in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that when they stood in the Azara, it was tzefufim, it was cramped. Now, what's a bigger mitzvah? To stand in the Azara, or to sleep in Yerushalayim? What's a bigger mitzvah? To stand in the Azara. There's a mitzvah of Riyah. Every Jew is commanded to stand in the Azara, and yet the Mishnah says when they stood in the Azara, it was cramped. It was uncomfortable. It was tzufufim. So then how could the Mishnah then say, but in Yerushalayim, when they went to sleep, there was plenty of room? Why would it have been cramped in the Azara and roomy in Yerushalayim itself? If it was roomy in Yerushalayim, certainly Kavachaymer it should be roomy in the Azara. Says the Chasam Sofer, let me tell you something. If it was cramped in the Azara, you could bet your bottom dollar it was more cramped in Yerushalayim. The Mishnah doesn't say it wasn't cramped in Yerushalayim. You know what the Mishnah says? Nobody ever complained about it. It doesn't say Loi hayatzar lekol ha'olim b'Yerushalayim. It doesn't say it wasn't cramped. It was cramped in Yerushalayim. But it says Loi amar adam lachaveroi. Nobody ever spoke about it. Why? Al kol pishayim techase ahava. There was such a tremendous love for Yerushalayim. There was such a tremendous chiba. People were so overwhelmed with ecstasy just to be in Be'er Lekenu that no one would ever utter a complaint against the city. People go to Yerushalayim. How was it? It was good. It was hot. It was, the prices are expensive.
Traffic.
How can you say such a thing? Talk about Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim, you cannot say a bad word. She's your kala. What would happen if your kala would find out that you said a bad word about her? She's not going to be happy. You know what you're going to have to do to overcome that? Nah. Bad news. You can't... Flowers ain't going to do it. No way. Says Chasam Sofer. Uvechidusha on the fourth line in number 7. Chidushay agadol shli amarti. Shalai ratza kadosh baruch hu lasos neis. Why didn't the Rebbeinu Shalom make a miracle when they stood? So when they stood, says Chasam Sofer, Hashem wanted it to be cramped because He wanted them to have the schar igra duchga de beikala. Right? The Gemara says the schar of coming to the shiur is when it's cramped. And then the Chasam Sofer says like this, 2 lines down. He says, but the Mishnah's Mashra they were at Safaf, Mikol shekein belino shirushalayim, Dolo hayu mitzvah kol kach kriyas panim ba'azara, Ubevadai hayu nidchakim. It certainly was very cramped. Ela shahanis haya, you want to hear a miracle? That the Jews didn't complain. That's the nest. That's the miracle. Shaloi amar adam me'olam, shemei roiv avas Hashem v'simcha, asher smeicham Hashem b'yotzim shama, Loi Omar Me'olam Tzarli HaMakayim. And Rabbi Reisman's Sofer, Pathways of the Prophets, he writes that Rav Pam would say that it hurts his ears when people would speak bad about Yerushalayim in a negative manner. Somebody would ask about how's your visit to Yerushalayim, and the friend would say the weather was lousy. Chen HaMaraglim. Can't say bad about Yerushalayim. I'll tell you another example of Chasam Sofer's tremendous ava for Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah says, the famous Mishnah at the end of Kedushin, Asara Yuchsin Alu mi Bavel. 10 types of Jews went up from Bavel. So the Gemara asks, why does it say Alu mi Bavel? Says the Gemara, it's teaching me the following. Kamash Malon Kedetanya Vekamta Vialisa El Hamakayim Asher Yivchar Hashem Lekach. It says you will go up. You will stand up and go up to the place that Hashem selected. Melamed, we see Shebeis Hamikdash Gavaya Mikol Eretz Yisrael. The Beis Hamikdash was the high point of Eretz Yisrael. The Eretz Yisrael Gavaya Mikol Ha'aratzos. Eretz Yisrael is the highest of all the lands. Eretz Yisrael is the highest of all the lands. So Chasam Sofer asks, wait a second. Anybody who knows anything about topography knows that, first of all, Eretz Yisrael is not the highest of all the lands.
It has the lowest point on earth.
Yeah, first of all, you have the lowest point on earth. Second of all, I think maybe the Catskill Mountains, are higher than Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is the highest point on earth. On where I live, on Union Terminal, 150th, from 79th, you go up that little hill. That's higher, On my second floor of my building, Eretz Yisrael is the highest point on earth. It's not really that high. And Yerushalayim is the highest point in Eretz Yisrael? No, it's not. Har Hermon is not taller. You ever see a snow-capped Har Abayis? Once in a while. It's not like Har Hermon. Right? In fact, Chazal say, on the Pasuk, Pasuk says, In Tehillim, Parak Kuf Lamed Gimel, Ketal Chermoin Shayoyred al Har Tzion. The tal of Chermoin goes down to Har Tzion, to the Machon Maggid Harakiah. So first of all, Eretz Yisrael is not the highest land, and Har Tzion is not the highest point in Eretz Yisrael. What? Mount Everest is not higher? The bottom of Mount Everest is higher than Har Tzion. Says the Chasam Sofer, let me tell you what the Gemara means. You know, when you look at a globe, right? So what's the top point of the globe? The North Pole. Who decided that the North Pole should be the top point of the globe? The people who made the globe. There's nothing about the North Pole that makes it the top point of the globe. So what is the top point of the globe? The answer is whatever the focal point is, because it's a circle. And whenever you have a circle, whatever is the focal point, that's the top point of the globe. So in other words, because by definition, something that's perfectly round, every point is the highest point. It just depends what you're focusing on. It's like that with everything, says Chasam Sofer. If you're somewhere, so the horizon in a distance looks like it's going down. And it is, because the earth is round. And if you look up in the sky is up. And wherever you are in the world, the horizon is always going down. That's because the world is perfectly circular. So any point on earth that you could establish is the focal point, that will be the highest point on earth. So since Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Asher Einei Hashem Elokecha Ba, Eretz Yisrael is the focal point of the globe, Memela, it's the highest point on earth. It's higher than Mount Everest. Because when you're looking at a globe, Eretz Yisrael should be on the top, and Mount Everest is somewhere on the side. It may be jutting out, but Eretz Yisrael is still higher. And you want to know what's the high point of Eretz Yisrael? Yerushalayim, Har Tzion. Why? Because once you establish the focal point of the world, that becomes the highest point on the world. What Chazal are saying is not in matters of topography. Har Tzion is more feet above sea level than any other point. What it means is that is the center of the world. You know, when people talk about central Jerusalem, different people have different definitions of central Jerusalem. Unfortunately, today people think central Jerusalem is the hotel area or Rehov Yafa. That is very far from central Jerusalem. Central Jerusalem is the Kaisel HaMaravi. Central Jerusalem was where Rebbe Yashiv lived. That's central Jerusalem. It all depends on the focal point. Again, bringing out this idea that Yerushalayim is not just our city, but is like a living entity, is like a kala. So in the 19th century, there was a terrible earthquake that destroyed the whole northern region of Eretz Yisrael, especially the city of Tzfas was completely destroyed. And the Chasam Sofer raises a question that we dare not ask. We would never have the ability to ask or answer such a question. And that is, the Chasam Sofer wants to know, why did it happen? Says the Chasam Sofer, let me tell you something. Yerushalayim is our kala. And Yerushalayim is a living entity. And Yerushalayim is the gateway of heaven. And Yerushalayim is the place that is connected to the Shamayim. And that's where Yaakov Avinu lay, and he had a dream, and he saw the ladder go up to Shamayim. It is the center point of the world. And for hundreds of years already, every Lag Ba'omer, everyone's running to Meron and to Tzfas. And what would your kala think if during your engagement you're hanging out with somebody else? Oh boy, would she be angry. And she would let you know. And boy, would she make your life miserable. Says the Chasam Sofer, Yerushalayim is your kala. And if everyone's clamoring for another city and focusing on the kever of Shema Yechoy in a different city, guess who gets very jealous? Your kala. And boy, does she get jealous. And if a kala could, what would she do to the rival? She'd slit her throat. Says the Chasam Sofer, Yerushalayim caused the earthquake in Tzfas. It's the jealousy of Yerushalayim. Says the Chasam Sofer, everyone's going to Tzfas on Lag Ba'omer. Where does it say it in the Gemara to go there? Where does it say in the Poskim? Says the Chasam Sofer, count me out. Count me out. To make a focus around the city other than Yerushalayim. Now what would the Chasam Sofer say about going to cities in on Yom Tovim in Russia. What would he say about that? I didn't say anything. What does some Sofer say about that? Some Sofer says, look at these words. The kinas Yushalayim asasazai. The jealousy of Yushalayim did this. Kisham Shara Shamayim, number 11, third line. That's the gateway of heaven. Ir Shechubra La Yachdav. That's the city attached to heaven. Sham Har HaMoriah. That's where Har HaMoriah is. Akedas Yitzchak. Sham Shachav Yaakov. That's where Yaakov lay b'cholam. He had a dream. Sulam Sham Har Beis Hashem. Teo Shekol Piyos Oile Alav Poinim. That is the place where all eyes are upon. V'lo Zazo Shechina Mikoisam Aravi. V'nei Lagamri Zam Mikarv Meir Sham. It's already 100 years. Samu Preim L'Tzfas. Everyone's turning to Tzfas. Kisham Kavar Isha Leki Harajbi B'Meiron. And you have the Ari and Tzfas. And everyone who comes to Eretz Yisrael, they go straight to the mystical city. And they forsake Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is Nishkacha Lagamri. Wait, says the Chasam Sofer. V'hu ir Shem Hashem Shama. There's only one ir Elokeinu. Shegam Bizman Hazeh Mitzvah Lalois L'Regel Yerushalayim, says the Chasam Sofer. Chasam Sofer Shita is there's a mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel Bizman Hazeh. I don't think we pass in that way. No chiyuv to be lalois. Chasam Sofer says it's a mitzvah. And says Chasam Sofer, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov Emdim. And nobody thinks to go there. Oh, all they do is they go for yard sites to Tzfas and Teferia. And says Chasam Sofer, believe me, I already argued with Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis. How could you even make a Yom Tov on Lag BaOmer? And then he says 5 lines from the end. He says, Val Kalpanim, Lo Yadati Ma'mokim Li'lula. I don't know how you can make a big celebration and forsake Yerushalayim. So Chasam Sofer's opinion was that Yerushalayim was the jealous Kala and she caused the complete...
When did this happen?
I think in the 1830s.
In Lag BaOmer?
It didn't happen on Lag BaOmer, but Chasam Sofer is describing the phenomenon of how everybody forsakes Yerushalayim and goes to these cities for different occasions.
So when it changed, how come now it's not happening?
I'll tiftach I don't know. Okay. I'll tell you another Chasam Sofer. By the way, this idea in the Chasam Sofer, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky just came out with a beautiful Sefer on Nevi'im Achronim and Ksubim. He says the exact same idea. We know that in Shas, there's a famous machlokes between Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Shmuel. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says, "Bizman she'adam oisa ritzono shel makom." Then you learn Torah and malachtacha nasas hayidei acherim. Right? That's the opinion of Shimon Bar Yochai. He was not a fan of going to work. And Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion, v'asafta deganecha hanig bahem minag derech eretz. And what does it mean? V'hikisa b'yom v'layla, a little bit in the morning, a little bit at night. And the Gemara concludes, Harbe Yasuk Rabbi Shmuel. Also b'yadam. Rabbi Shmuel's mahalach works. Rabbi Shimon also b'yadam. Comes the Chasam Sofer and Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says the same thing, and they say, Kulei almo loy pligi. There's no machlokes. Depends where you live. Rabbi Shmuel, who says go to work, he's talking about in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who says don't work, he's talking about Chutz La'aretz. How does that make sense? Says the Chasam Sofer, let me explain something to you. You look in Megillas Rus, and who's the Gadol Hadar in the period of Megillas Rus? Boaz. So imagine if I told you, I went to Eretz Yisrael, and I couldn't find Rav Chaim Kanievsky. So where was he? He was in the field. He was plowing the field. Rav Chaim? He doesn't leave the Dalai Lama. Is he doing plowing the field? Yeah, he does. He sleeps there at night also. He's very into working the land. Say, what? What's going on? Doesn't make sense. And that would be quite strange, right? But in Megillas Rus, we're talking about the Gadol Hadar Boaz. He's always in the field. What's he doing in the field? Bittul Torah. Says the Chasam Sofer, would you have a kasha on the Gadol Hadar? How could he put on tefillin and it's Bittul Torah? Would you ask such a kasha? No. Of course not. You have to be mekayim the mitzvahs also. Would you have a kasha on the Gadol Hadar? What's he doing shaking lulav and esrog? It's Bittul Torah. Of course not. Would you have a kasha on what's he doing davening? The answer is, of course, you have to learn as much as you can, but you have 613 mitzvahs. So don't ask on Boaz, what's he doing in the field? He's living in Eretz Yisrael. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to work the land, the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, says the Chasam Sofer. He can't pater himself, but he has a field, he has to work it. So you want to know why he's not learning? You don't have a problem why he's putting on tefillin, so don't have a problem why he's working the land. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says, go to work. In Eretz Yisrael, you go to work, because working the land is a mitzvah hatuya ba'aretz. Says the Chasam Sofer, it could be even someone involved in commerce and business is also mekayim, a mitzvah of Yishuv ha'aretz. Why? Because it's all for the development and betterment of the society in Eretz Yisrael. So the Chasam Sofer writes. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he's talking about chutz la'aretz. You're working the land in chutz la'aretz for who? So that eventually you could be thrown out, like we were thrown out of every single country we ever helped prosper. You're going to be a farmer in America, so that eventually it will go to our conquerors. You're going to be a farmer in France. You're going to be a farmer in Europe. For what? To help the Goyim who are eventually going to take it over. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai says, what are you going to work for in Chutz La'aretz? Says the Chasam Sofer, again, you see the idea, tremendous ava for the Yishuv. He says, again, this shiur, just making disclaimer, nothing to do with any political affiliation, no agenda. Chasam Sofer was an Orthodox rabbi without any... Chasam Sofer sent his Talmidim to go to Eretz Yisrael, and he writes in one of the Tshuvas about a Talmud Rav Amram, who was headed to Tzfas, and the Chasam Sofer told him, what are you going to do? Go to Yerushalayim? And Chasam Sofer writes, I could tell that he wasn't going to listen to me anyway, so I just told him, go where you want to go. Chasam Sofer sent his Talmidim to try to go to settle land. Okay. If you look, there's a Sefer, by the way, I'm going to point out, I have a Sefer called Sefer Eretz Yisrael, the Mishnah Chasam Sofer, hundreds of pages of writings of the Chasam Sofer just on Chibas Eretz Yisrael. It's written, the same publishers of Chasam Sofer al Torah, so the same publishers of Shalas Chivas Chasam Sofer. There's a Sefer called Sefer, just on the writings of Chasam Sofer. By the way, there's a halacha that it's nageya every day, that if you're davening in a minyan where they have a Sefer Torah, so then you say Tachnon b'nefilas apayim, right? If there's no Sefer Torah, you don't put your head down. What if there's Svarim? You still don't put your head down. Still don't put your head down. However, where does that halacha come from? Because the pasuk says in Yeshua, "Vayipol al panav arza lefnei aroin Hashem." He fell on his face before the aroin. So we learn out from there a remez that when you have an aroin, you do it b'nefilas apayim, and when there's no aroin, you don't do nefilas apayim. Says Rabbi Chil Michal Tukachinsky. He also wrote a sefer. The name of the sefer is Eretz Yisrael. That when you're in Yerushalayim, even if you don't have an aroin, you do nefilas apayim. Why? Because since the halacha is learned out from the pasuk Lifnei Hashem, Kol Makom b'Yerushalayim Nechshav Lifnei Hashem, even Bisman Hazeh, and we pass in this way. Rabbi Moshe writes in Tshuva, also all the poskim agree that in Yerushalayim Bisman Hazeh, even without a Sefer Torah, even without an Aron, it's Nechshav Lifnei Hashem, even B'Chorbana, even with no Beis HaMikdash, even today, 2015, you don't need an Aron, it's Nechshav Lifnei Hashem. Look at number 13, B'Yushalayim, Noyagin, Nefilas Apayim, Gam B'Bayis, She'im Sham, Sefer Torah. The minhag is to do Tachlim and Nefilas Apayim, even if there's no Sefer Torah. Gam Kishein Sham Makom Kavul Tefillah, even if there's no established minyan. Tahad Noyagin, Nefilas Apayim. Rak b'makim sheis Sefer Torah. The only reason why we only do Tachnon b'nefilas if there's a Sefer Torah, this is a smach on the remez. Vayipol al panav arza lefnei aroin Hashem. V'Yerushalayim shekdushasa kedushas olam harehi lefnei aroin Hashem. Everywhere in Yerushalayim, even today, it is considered like lefnei Hashem. Another Chasam Sofer. Rachel Imenu. Yeah, Mama Rachel. By the way, Rosh Chodesh is coming up soon, right? Rosh Chodesh is when? Wednesday, Thursday next week. So, I want to tell you, we know Avram Avinu was Masake in Tfilas Shachris. Yitzchak was a Masake in Tfilas Mincha. Yaakov is Masake in Tfilas Arvis. But we have Musaf on Rosh Chodesh. Who is Masake in Musaf? Says the Chida, Rachel Imenu. How do I know that? Rashi Chadashim Le'amcha. That's not that. Rashi Tevois. Rachel. Rachel is Masake in Musaf. Why? Because Musaf is Rosh Chodesh is the Yom Tov for Nashim. So she was Masake Tfilas Musaf. Okay. So says the Chasam Sofer. We know that Rachel Imenu was given a unique nevuah. Koil berama nishma nehi b'chis amrurim. Rachel mevaka al baneha me'ano lehinachem. Rachel is crying for her children, and the Rebbe Shalom says, "Mini koilech mi bechi, stop crying. Be'inayach midima, ki yesh sachar lefulasech, v'yesh tikva la'acharisech." And Chasam Sofer wants to know what is so unique about the nevuah of Rachel Imenu. After all, the Rebbe Shalom promised many Nevi'im that Klal Yisrael will eventually return to Eretz Yisrael. Hashem promised Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem promised Kol HaNevi'im, Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, Yechezkel. What is so unique about the prophecy of Rachel Imenu, right, where Chazal say that nobody was successful in gaining the Rachamei Shamayim until Rachel Mevaka Abanel, and Rebbe Shalom says, okay, Rachel, I'll listen to your tefillah. And what does Hashem say? The exact same thing he said to every other Navi. The Klal Yisrael is going to come back to Eretz Yisrael. Says the Chasam Sofer. Of course Hashem promised every Navi that Klal Yisrael is going to return to Eretz Yisrael. But when? All the other Nevi'im were only promised that will return to Eretz Yisrael when Mashiach comes. Comes Rachel Imenu. And Rachel Mevaka Abaneh. Hashem says, you know what? Yesh Sachar Lefulasech. I give you a promise. Klal Yisrael will return to Eretz Yisrael even before Mashiach comes. That was the Haftacha to Rachel Imenu. Divrei Chasam Sofer. That the Haftacha to Rachel Imenu, says Chasam Sofer, the Rambam says, that Klal Yisrael could have Kibbutz Golios even before Binyan Beis HaMikdash, even before Bias Mashiach, and that was the Haftacha to Rachel Imenu of Veshavu Banim Legvulam. Where do I see that in the words of Chasam Sofer?
Yeah. Faulty.
No,
You have to read it. Read it carefully. You'll see. I'll show you after.
He said that.
I think it says it. Okay. I want to tell you, speak out one more Chasam Sofer, and then we'll wrap it up. In Parshas Kisavai, it says, "V'haya Kisavai ala Eretz, Asher Hashem lekecha noisein lach." You come to Eretz Yisrael, and v'yirishta v'yashavta ba, and then it talks about the mitzvah of bikurim. Again, we mentioned earlier in the shir, mitzvah bikurim is a tikkun for Chen Amaraglim. Okay. Frek the hafla on the Sifri. The Sifri says, if you're Mekayim this mitzvah, you'll be zocheh to go into Eretz Yisrael. Hafla says what? If you're Mekayim bikurim, you'll be zocheh to go into Eretz Yisrael. There's no mitzvah bikurim outside of Eretz Yisrael. You can't be Mekayim bikurim outside of Eretz Yisrael. What does it mean if you're Mekayim this Inyan, then you'll be zocheh to go into Eretz Yisrael? Says the Chasam Sofer, I have another kasha. There's something called Birchas Hamazon. You ever hear that? After you eat bread, right? You bench. So it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, right? You know that mitzvah? So the second bracha, we say, Noidel cha Hashem lekeinu, al she'enchat al avoseinu, Eretz chem d'tov v'rachava, v'yal shohit seisanu Hashem lekeinu, me'eretz Mitzrayim. Does that make any sense?
Which comes first?
Thank you for Eretz Yisrael, and thank you for taking us out of Mitzrayim. First, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, and then He gave us Eretz Yisrael. Says of Chasam Sofer that no matter where we've gone, no matter what galus we're in, nevertheless, the hearts and minds of Klal Yisrael are always preoccupied with Artzena Akdosha, with Eretz Yisrael. And that's why when Paroi speaks to the brothers in Parshas Vayigash, what do the brothers tell Paroi? Lagur ba'aretz banu. We're only here temporarily. Our minds and hearts are still occupied with Eretz Yisrael. Says the Heilig Chasam Sofer, B'chol rega ha'efshari datenu al nachal aseinu. Every available moment, our hearts are on Eretz Yisrael. Says the Chasam Sofer, and when that is the case, the Goyim have no shlita over us. B'chol zman shahaya daitem kach, lo shalat b'hem paroi. But bayomas Yosef, v'yachav, b'chol adar ahu, and then the generation forgot about Eretz Yisrael. What happens? Vayakom melech chadash. Fine. Says the Chasam Sofer, our success in the Galus is only if we're machshev that this is not where we belong. We belong in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, in what zechus did we leave Mitzrayim? The zechus that noideh lecha Hashem lekeinu Hashem chalta laviseinu Eretz chemda tov rechava. We left Mitzrayim because there were some Jews that still held on to the ancient belief that lagor ba'aretz banu. That's why when we're mekayim the mitzvah of bikurim, part of the mitzvah of mikra bikurim is what do we say in the Haggadah? We say the pasuk of lagor ba'aretz banu. We make a point of the fact that when Klal Yisrael came down to Mitzrayim, the pasuk says vayir Mitzrayim vayagar sham. Vayagar sham. It was only vayagar sham. That's why whenever we bench, first we make the point that Hashem gave us Eretz chemda tov rechava, and it was in that zechus that thou shalt tisan Hashem lekeinu me'eretz Mitzrayim. So says the Chasam Sofer, what the pasuk means is v'haya ki savay el haaretz. If you're mekayim this inyan, you'll be zoicha to go to Eretz Yisrael. Which means, if you're mekayim the inyan, that your heart and your mind and your soul is always preoccupied with mitzvahs bikurim and with mitzvahs Eretz Yisrael, in that merit, the Rebbeinu Shalom Taka will give you the opportunity to go there. And let's conclude with the pasuk in Yeshaya. Pasuk says, Al choy moisayach Yerushalayim, on your walls, Yerushalayim hifkadati shoymrim, I have appointed guards, kal hayom v'chal halayla, all day and all night. Tamid lo yecheshu, they are never silent. Who are these guards? Who are the guards of Yerushalayim? Says Radak, they're drashes, they're malachim, who are appointed to stand guard over Jerusalem and to constantly pray for the rebuilding of Yerushalayim. But says Radak, v'yesh mefarshim, you know who the shoymrim are? The Avelei Tzion, those who mourn for Yerushalayim, they're the Shoymrim. Those who daven day and night for the return of Yerushalayim. But says Radak, you could explain further. Al kol Yisrael begalusam, every Jew in Galus is a guard over Jerusalem. Shehem Shoymrim, they watch. V'tzoifim, and they yearn Tamid binyan Yerushalayim. Whether it's in their Berchas Hamazon, whether it's in their Shemona Esrei, when they say Yerushalayim Ircha, every morning, every afternoon, every night, those who are mechavein, those who yearn for binyan Yerushalayim, they are given the great honor of being considered the Shoymrei Ha'ir, the Shoymrei Yerushalayim. These are the Shoymrim that the Rebbeinu Shalom were mifgad over Yerushalayim, and we should be zoicha to sameach, to samach, re'em ha'ahuvim, b'vinyan Yerushalayim, m'heri aminu, amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.